welcome to another video. Today we're going to look at how we do the drums, how we get the right samples, how we put them together, and how we do the bus processing, and then how we glue that to the low end that we did in the last session. If you haven't watched part 2 on the low end, go back and watch that. And if you haven't watched that, go back and watch part 1. So start from the beginning of the sequence. Otherwise, you're not going to understand what's going on. The video I'm going to show you today was actually a 1-hour segment from a one-to-one private lesson I did with a student. I'm going to do my best to cut it up and just have the best bits, but it might be kind of long, but it's going to be juicy. There's going to be so much information here. I'm going to be commentating on everything I'm doing. So it's not just like the how to do it. It's also like the decision making and the why behind stuff. And the student themselves will be asking questions as well, which I'll leave in just for extra context. Without any further ado, here we go. Working through the drums, right? So I'm going to finish mixing these drums and just like showing you kind of like how we polish them up, and then we'll do some drum bus processing, which will be interesting. Similar to how we did like the low end bus here, to sort of get that all mastered. We do the same thing with the drums. So let's start off. Another thing we can do as well is we can add some sidechain to it. So I like sidechaining on like almost everything. I don't know if the Shaper box is already doing that. Not doing anything.
I think it's just in there for Spectrum.
Okay, right, gotcha. Just add some sidechain to it to give it some groove. Moving on to the crash. Quiet. Reverb here. So this crash is like quite thin, right? So we want to absolutely splash it out. So you'll see if there's some crashes in the reference. Doesn't seem like they're using crashes in the reference. Probably just more like effects like that boo boo and like white noise and stuff.
So what was that effect again?
Like a little laser sound, right?
Back in the 70s.
Yeah, dude. So yeah, I would like to like wet it up a little bit. We could try some echo and stuff. The one thing with like doing, I don't know if we went over this last week, but with like delays and reverbs, like if you keep it on an insert and you think, oh, I'll just use 30% wet, you're thinking like it's just adding 30% of the signal, but actually it's also removing a little bit of the original signal as well the more you turn it up. So you'll start to lose volume, even if you're below 50% on the original sound. So it's always good to put it into like a rack. So you've got the original signal here, and then you've got the delayed one at 100%. And then you have the best of both, right? And then you don't have to worry about the original signal being dampened. And then you can sort of use this volume fader here to sort of blend it in. We use the EQ as well on it, just to make sure it stays in a good place. Because if we leave it open like that, it'll go into the low end. We don't want that. That's good. You can always just look at the oscilloscope as well and see kind of like where the drums are sitting together. Pull back the snare. But a lot of these, like, you see, it's got like a lot of these like big spikes coming off of it. Let's try and clip it and see if it actually changes the sound at all. So I'm just going to grab a clipper. It's very loud in terms of its peak volume. And obviously, I want to control the dynamics as much as possible so that when we do the drum bus processing, we're not just slamming the compressor. Because sometimes with these samples, right, there's just going to be like these weird spiky transients coming off them for whatever reason. It could be because of the processing that's already on there. It could just be the sample. But essentially what we can do is fix that with just basic clipping off and then see if it actually sounds worse or better anyway. See there, but it's like -8.
So your guide to that is just in terms of being able to see the peak on the oscilloscope.
Exactly, because like can you hear a difference between it with or without?
Yeah, I think like without it smears a little bit. You can just hear it. I don't know.
Yeah, I personally really can't hear any difference in terms of the texture. Like it still sounds like the same snare. Right? Maybe there's a bit of a dynamic difference, like, but it's so subtle. It's like, yeah, you can't hear anything. So
Yeah.
we've just chopped
I'm
off those.
trying to close my eyes and do it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Firstly, I can't really hear like a noticeable difference. Like maybe you could be really anal about it, be like, oh yeah, maybe there's a little like something, but really there's nothing really different. Um, and we can see on the oscilloscope like there's just these huge spikes coming off of it, right? And so we don't need that. I don't know what's causing it. I'm going to see if there's any processing that's actually causing it, because if we could figure that out, that would probably be quite educational as well. So I'm just going to try see. Yeah, it's quite
So this is the
tough.
one last week we added the clap onto it.
Did we did indeed. We had that, and then yeah, cool. So yeah, it was already like that. I think then just removing those transients a little bit. You can even push it like quite far, right? And the sound still sounds the same. Because a lot of the sound is coming from here, not from these big spikes. And so by doing this, I've essentially just got 12 decibels of headroom, which means we can then turn the snare up even louder if we wanted to. We have the headroom for it now, which is really nice, right? More reverb on it too. Sounds good. All right, cool. What else have we got? We've got these hat percussions. Those are effect. You're not shy about fucking things up. Whoa.
I stole those from someone else, so that's.
Huh?
I stole them from someone else.
The effects.
Yeah, that entire
okay,
track.
Cool. Oh, I see. Cool, fair enough.
Sorry, I artistically reused.
Yeah, so the only thing I'm going to do here is just remove this like muddy part. It's going to interfere with the bass line, basically. So just get rid of that. But I don't mind the hats at all. That sounds fine. Notice as well, it's like at 0, but it's like super quiet still. So it's probably something to do with the sample level. Yeah. It's just super quiet samples. So I'm just going to pick a utility tool. Actually, was there a utility?
There should be at least one in there, yeah.
Yeah. I'm not going to mess with that just in case it's doing like something.
So if you go back to the left-hand side, there's the very first utility. There's actually the gain is turned down on that.
I noticed, yeah. But I'm going to leave that there just in case like it's going into something that might be making a difference. I don't think there is.
There isn't. Nothing in that channel will be making a difference to the sound.
Cool. So the reason I say this is, do you know how saturators work? This is like saturators and compressors. This is a big deal for. So if you push more volume into a saturator, it does more work, basically. And so if there was a saturator in here somewhere, I wouldn't reset this because I wouldn't want all of a sudden the saturation to get way hotter, because then it would have a different textural sound. But I don't think there is anything here, so we can just slam this.
There's no, not that I remember anyway.
Yeah, so we can just slam this back up. Oh, look at this. I think a little bit of transient shaping as well might help. Just like reduce those tails. We spoke about this before. This is the wrong one. I want to use the kilohertz one. But we spoke about this before about, just getting those tails a little bit shorter. Now it has more of like a groove, right? Like doot, doot, doot. Without it. This one here, so you can see it sort of blends into the next hat. And so by putting the sustain back on here, we turn the sustain down, put it back on, you see this one isn't going to blend so much. That's kind of what we want. We kind of want the next hit to be free of any kind of interference.
So it's a clean start each time.
Exactly. Really important for transient-based stuff. It isn't so bad in this situation, but sometimes you'll see things where like there's like a tail of something that goes into the next hit, and then all of a sudden, because it's interfering, there's like a phasing issue where either the transient is either super loud or super quiet.
Yep.
And so it's going to ruin your consistency. And an amateur producer would look at that and be like, "Oh, I need more compression because there's inconsistencies in the volume," and then they just compress the shit out of it to try and get the level to be the same. And it's just like, no, you just fix the phasing issues, right?
Okay.
So a lot of the time, like a lot of mixing, when I take like student projects, it's like sometimes it's just like, hey, let's just shorten the tails of stuff, and all of a sudden the mix is just cleaner.
Makes sense.
Superb. And then I'm going to where the shaker is. There's a little bit of mud in the bottom. Bit of rumble. Shaker sounds fine though.
Is there a kind of rule of thumb that you're using in terms of how much you're giving to each of the reverbs?
Oh, okay, yeah, that's a great question. So with the reverb, you want to like this is it's kind of esoteric. I'm about to say, but bear with me. You want to be able to feel it, not esoteric, but whatever. It's you want to be able to feel it, but not hear it.
Okay.
So it should feel like yeah, okay, now this feels like it's inside a space, but I can't hear the reverb because if I put it too high, you can hear it overpower.
Yeah, it just becomes artificial
And
sounding.
and with nothing, it's almost like it's super dry and unnatural. So there's a point in between where it's like it like sits underneath the sound, so it's not overpowering it, and you can feel that the space is opened up around it, but you couldn't necessarily identify the reverb. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. It does make sense. I was just thinking also in terms of the proportion between, so obviously you've got the five different, or a number of different, kind of how many times in there. So just the kind of proportion that you're aiming for again, or was that just more of a feel?
More of a feel, yeah. So we'll go into the reverbs when we do the synths, because for the drums, I'm not going to use the long reverbs really, but I'll put the long ones on for the synths, and then we'll sort of see. But yeah, they go from smallest to biggest basically, and yeah. Well, we're going to grab this side chain that we used earlier. I'm going to put it on both these sounds that we had just to add some groove. I had a student, this is funny. I had a student the other day. He was like watching me do this. He's like, but then I got his next project. He was like, "Oh, I made it simple and I just put the side chain on the whole drum bus." And I was like, well, "What's that going to do to your snare?" He was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "Well, think about it. You side chain the whole drum bus. Where's the snare going to hit?" So, all right, because if the snare hits on the kicks, if you're side chaining it to the kicks, like, oh, well, the snare's disappeared. It's like, yeah, bro, you can't be putting it on the group. And then we can use the oscilloscope here to sort of anchor, because we know the snare's already in a good place. We start looking at the hi-hats. Can even get the snare louder. Generally, I want my snare to be like louder than my hat. Turn it down a little bit. We'll balance this against the reference track in a sec, but I'm just going to do like a first pass.
Sure.
This is where we might start to see some like phasing issues. Like as I bring this like trippy 16th hat thing in, the fade, like some of the snare and the hi-hat might jump in volume or something if we watch carefully. Not so bad. You can see this hi-hat slightly changing in volume, but it's not a big deal. If it's moving a little bit, that's fine. If you see the hi-hat all of a sudden just jump in volume, then we've got a problem. So this technique I'm using here, by the way, is called triangulation. So I'm soloing like two elements, the snare and the hat, and then a third one, and mixing the third one in against those, right? And so that way you have a lot of clarity of like where things sit before things get too messy. And you can sort of visually see your headroom. Also use your ears, by the way. I'm not just doing this visually, but, so that should be obvious. But yeah,
So I've got my eyes closed half the time here.
Perfect. Just what I want to hear. Yeah, so here's you see there's a spike on the snare there, sometimes happening. You can see these, this is where there's some phase. So what we're going to do to fix this, there's two things we can do. We can either go to like the delay channels have I shown this before? I don't know if I did. So if you go down to here in Ableton where track options are, you can put the track delays on. We can go to, which sound is this? This is the hat perk. Here it is. We can actually move the track like a few milliseconds backwards. And so the transient should just miss the snare. That's in theory. We'll see what happens. Yeah. A little bit. If I put this back to 0, you see it happens there. It's not horrendous.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, see, 8 milliseconds is not enough to really hear the difference, but the computer still says
it. Yeah,
okay. Exactly. We could even move like this. We could even move the snare like 1 millisecond forward, just so you'd have more space. I'm not going to do that now, but we could, in theory, do that too. Or the other thing we do is we duplicate the sidechain and we sidechain it to the snare, and then we just like program this in to be really quick. So you see the gain reduction here is like super like, straight in and out by using this frequency knob. And you see here now the consistency, there's no spikes coming out of the snare and so on, right? So we're getting a really good signal. Moving on, let's do the shaker next. I definitely want to pan this as well, so I'm going to get Pancake by Cable Guys. Panning's really good just to move stuff around the stereo spectrum.
Yep.
Maybe put this on at half. Yeah. Probably a bit more reverb. And we're going to do the same thing here with sidechaining this to the snare. So just duplicate onto here for the snare. Pan this slightly to the right, and this one slightly to the left, just a bit more separation. Nice. All right, now that I've given like a bit of a basic mix, I'm now going to do the drum bus processing, and then we'll compare it to the reference track. So the reason why I want to do the drum bus processing first is so everything's nice and tight. So when we compare against the reference track, it's just very small changes. Because if we did it before, then did the drum bus processing could change so much that then we have to do the referencing again. So I'm going to go to my template here and just grab my drum bus processor, my rack. Now, there's additional things here that aren't going to be that necessary. For example, the soothe, let's just delete that. Also, the ozone. Do you have ozone imager?
Yes, I do.
I'll leave that on then because we can actually use that. And then we have a transient shaper. So we've got EQ, compression. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to EQ to remove any kind of like mud or just unnecessary frequencies or resonant frequencies. Then we're going to use a glue compressor just to tap the ceiling and just get things just to sit a bit nicer. Then we use a transient shaper, a multi-band one, so it's different to the kilohertz one. This one I can actually transient shape at different bands. Then we're going to use some saturation, some stereo width. There's an additional EQ here that we may use or may not use, and then there's a clipper right at the end. So before we do any of that, I'm just going to check what the levels are of the drum bus. About -8, that's a really good position to be in. That's where we want to see it, around -8. So it was like the same with the kick and the bass, right? Before we did any processing, this was hitting right -8. Then it was like -6 when we actually hit with all the processing. With the drum bus, it's actually going to be a bit of the opposite way around. -8, -10 is kind of like a good starting point, and we probably want to like get it down to -10. And we're going to do this by like clipping it quite a lot. Drums sound great when they're clipped, so we just literally just pull the threshold down the clipper later, and yeah, we'll see. You'll see what I mean. But step one's going to be EQing. So we're going to EQ. Might want to remove that just for the sake of removing low end. Oops. So one thing I like to do, did I explain this last time with the spectral grab on the Q3, Q4?
I don't think so.
Okay, great. Do you have Q3 or Q4?
Yeah, got Q4.
Okay. So if you go down here to the analyzer, there's this thing here called spectral grab. Just turn this on, it turns purple. And then when you play, you just basically play it and you hover your mouse like at the bottom here inside the graph. And what will happen is it will turn purple and it will show you where some resonance might appear, some like resonant frequencies might be. So for example, this one here, A6.
Okay.
And what I do is you just grab it and then I like to just turn it up so I can then hear what it sounds like by itself. You can hear that whistle. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it back down to 0 and sort of think, hey, is this, because obviously it's a problem if I boost it, right? So that could be misleading. I think a lot of people on YouTube will be like, yeah, there's this technique called search and destroy. Find a frequency and then just fucking get rid of it. It's like, well, does the bad frequency sound bad at 0 dB? Because if it doesn't, then just don't fucking remove it. So we're just gonna boost it to identify so we know our ears can tune into what that bad frequency sounds like. We're gonna neutralize it at 0 and then say, okay, is it actually a problem? If it is, then we're gonna dip it until it removes the problem. I can still hear it, even at 0, there's a little bit of a ring. With the glue compressor, we want to do like a similar-ish thing to the low end, when we like let the attack pass the transient through and then we sort of grab what's in between to give it some groove. So we're gonna have like a high-ish attack, or pretty high attack, then a pretty slow release, a pretty fast release so that it can reset before the next transient hit. So essentially we're bouncing between this, resetting before the next snare. And we don't want much, we want like 1 or 2 dB of gain reduction. We'll do this, like this is like too much here, we've squashed it.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Maybe about there. And then with volume matching it, there's actually this Max for Live plugin you can buy. It's like a $5, I think, called Volume Buddy. And you put it on after the thing, after your plugin or whatever, it'll tell you the dB difference. Then on the makeup on the compressor, we just have to match it 0.9.
Okay.
And then we're back at equilibrium. Very subtle, but just catching it a little bit. Now with the transient shaper, we're going to set up 2 bands, probably like one around 600, and we're just going to solo the low band. And what we're doing here is essentially, we like having tails for the top end of our drums, like our hats and our snare, like has a bit of a tail. But for the low end of our drums, we want to avoid having any kind of like tails, because this is where you get like the doofy sound, like a doof, like that. And for rock, that's great. I love a bit of doofy snare in a rock. For electronic music, it doesn't sound great, mainly because like our vocals, our synths, and our bass line is going to sit down there. And like, I don't mind the snare being in the low frequencies, right? But it's got to get in and out super quick. Same with all the other drums. So all the percussion, all the drums, all the snares, hi-hats, I want them to be in the lows a little bit, but I want them to be like in and out and not like bleed into the low range, because if it does, it'll interfere with the synths and stuff. So I'm going to solo that. I'm going to turn the reverbs off as well, just so we're hearing it dry. Sort of see what's going on with the scope here. Bit of it. And then that's extreme what it would sound like. Just almost removes all of the tail. Wait, where am I? Hear that? It's like it was a bit snappier, right? Maybe went a bit too far, but yeah. Can you hear the difference? With the snare, without it, the snare feels like it goes to like doo. But with this on, it's like doof.
Yeah, you can just, it's like it's kind of smears. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that smear is going to get in the way of
Yeah.
our low end and stuff like that, as I explained.
Okay.
And then with the top end, it's somewhat similar, but the opposite. We're going to use the smooth function here because I don't want to be too aggressive here. Maybe put a
And
bit
just
of
in terms
attack on
of
it.
the frequency that you've picked for that, in terms of the differentiation between top end and the bottom end, so what and why?
Good question. So I picked around 600 just because, yeah, I instinctively know like 600 and below is at the low mids. And that's
Okay.
where I'm trying to avoid any problems. But you could play around with just moving this up and down. If we solo the lows again. So when you start to hear that the hi-hat's a bit like that, like
Yeah, it's gone too far.
okay,
Yeah.
it's gone too far, yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe even around like 740 is probably the sweet spot, right? But I'm not too bothered about it so much as long as I know like this is the low mids, this is the rest. That's kind of what it would be. And then to the high end, we're just going to do a gentle lift on the attack just to make the hi-hats just a bit more spicy. And then we're just going to maybe just bring this sustain down a little bit, but we'll have it in smooth mode, so it's not going to be as aggressive. Brings the high end to life like a little bit. So this is saying as well, it's actually quite helpful to know is like the life is in the transients. So if you can bring the transients a bit more to life, the track will feel more alive. Obviously, if you overdo the transients, it just sounds horrible. Like just brace yourself. I'll give you an example of this. Super sharp, super like, whoa, that's too much, bro.
Yeah.
So we just want a little bit just to make it so it just has a little bit of pokiness to it. It also helps like it sound more three dimensional because it's like it just pokes out, right?
Sure.
And so it brings it more to life rather than it sounding like flat or dull. So next thing I'm going to do is we're going to use Sound Choice Capitator here. Any saturated will do. I really like this one though because of the E mode. So this is going to add odd only harmonics to the signal, which is great for drums because it just sounds more, I don't know, just sounds good for drums. I don't know why. It's a human thing, right? But you can pick whatever you want. Do you know about the different modes on Decapitator?
I started to look at it the other day, and then I found myself getting drawn into that sort of hole, and then thought, no, just come away.
Yeah. So basically, I'm not going to go into it now, but A is odd and even, E is odd, and then the other ones are like some sort of combination between those two, right? So yeah, we're going to use E here anyway. So I'll keep the mix on 100%. I'm just going to bring this up until it gets a bit too weird, and then I'm going to bring it back. So by weird, I mean that the hi-hat, for example, gets really chalky, and it's just like, oh, it's just not nice. We'll just blend the dry wet. A bit of liveliness. All right, cool. Now with Ozone Imager, I was going to leave this one out, but seeing as you have the plugin, I will explain how I use it. I'm just going to reset all the parameters. So the first thing you want to do is make sure this is turned on here, otherwise it won't do anything. Kind of sneaky. And then the next thing you want to do is you want to add at least 3 bands. You can add a 4th one if you want. And then you're just gonna hit learn and then play. And it's gonna just find where the bands are for you. Perfect. Now, can you hear just the stereo if I just put this filter on?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So then we can hear the stereo signal. Then we can solo the bands here and we can kind of find out what's going on. So there's barely any stereo here in like the lows of the signal, but I'm just going to remove it all because I don't want any stereo signal for the sub of the drums. Like, why would you, right? I'll
Sure.
probably EQ out anyway later. Then we have the mid-range of the drums. Now I can hear that snare in the sides is a little bit too much. I'm just going to reduce this down. You actually compare the reference track real quick. So pay attention to their clap and see how wide it is. Barely any width on it, right? And that's because they sound great just down the center, right? You don't like a lot of stereo on our claps and snares. So we're just going to get a bit of that. And then we're going to go to the high end. Now this is like where you want to get the most out of it. And so we want to make sure we don't go between 0 and -1, because that's where you start to get phase problems. Okay. And we just want to keep it close to 0, but not going past 0. So at the moment we're like very thin. We can actually look at span here as well and compare like sort of the stereo levels of the high end as well. See, it's kind of here. So ours is probably a little bit louder. So let's just make sure that we're not overdoing it. So it turns down a little more. There. And you can use your ears as well just to compare like the high end. I've noticed on span there as well. In the reference track, it sort of curves off around like 18K there. And ours has like, it's a lot of signal at like 20K that we just don't need. So that's going to be the next part of here. They have this additional EQ. I don't always use this EQ, but today I will. Or actually, do we want to use this one? I don't think we do actually. I think we want something more surgical. Let's go over a Q4. And I'm literally just going to fucking do this at like a 72 or whatever and just do 18K. Maybe even a bit more, just to really compare it to the reference. Just like that. Maybe even a bit more. Maybe go like 1400. 14,000, sorry. That's probably the right place, but a bit too steep. Let's try 36. Cool. And then we're going to grab this clipper at the end. Before I do that, actually, check the levels of the drums. Definitely a lot louder. Let me also check what this EQ, because I think we've added some low end back in we don't need. So even though we didn't have any sub here before, the saturator would have added it a little bit back in, so we're just going to remove that. Basically inaudible, but it's going to mess with stuff like the compressors and stuff, so make sure we get rid of it. The clipper on, so everything's now hard at -8. And essentially now we have like another mastered stem. The next step we're going to do then, any questions so far, by the way?
Nothing specific. Again, this will be one just for me to go back through and just revisit all of that. So it's quite a lot of ground covered, but I understand in principle what you're doing at each step. So it's just for me to go away and explore.
Okay, so now that we've got this stem mastered, we can actually compare it to the reference track. So as I can break down the bands and listen to like just the high end, for example, I listen to the reference track, and I can just look at like what's going on here in terms of its like peak levels. You can see like the hi-hat. This is obviously the offbeat hi-hat here. And you can see here it peaking at like -6. And ours is roughly the same, probably a little bit louder. So I'm actually going to grab my my Schweppes EQ here, and I'm just going to turn down the high band by like -2. Bit closer, and then I'm going to go to the band below that. So it's still high end, but it's not like the air; it's more of the presence. Yeah. Not the same. The snare could use a little bit more here, but not a big deal. I'm going to leave it. But I think the hi-hats are more or less the same. I would say probably the biggest difference is our hi-hat is probably needs a little bit more transient shaping. So what I might do here is and just turn the sustain down even more. Put it back on, see how we're sounding. Just note it's not got any reverb on it. I feel like it's like I lost a bit of character. So should turn some of this back up. Because around there, 20%, you can hear like the chunkiness comes back in. That's good. Now that we've done that, we've got to check again where we're sitting. So the air band here, not the same. Let's just get that's a little bit too much here, so I'm going to grab like a 7.2 here, turn this down a little bit. So this is like an EQ I'm putting on the whole drum bus. Mm-hmm. And yeah, basically I'm just like looking at the oscilloscope and trying to just match the levels that way and match the shape. Because you can kind of see, it should be obvious at this point, but like I'm kind of looking at like the shape and the peak levels of stuff, and then sort of like listening back to ours. I'm like, okay, do I need to do that? One, and then two, if I do, how do I do that? And did I lose anything by doing that? And so that's how you're gonna get closer and closer to that professional sound, is by basically just emulating what you're seeing, using the visual as like a way to identify, but then using your ears as a way to correct. Right? We're not just doing this muted.
Yeah, it's not doing by maths. Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, because otherwise we'll just end up with a fucking robotic piece of music. But the visual does help us sort of see what's going on, and then being like, okay, now I can make an informed decision, right? Expand. So this is like now like the upper mids. Let's see if we can just boost around the upper mids a little bit. So one thing I like to do here with the EQ, this is really cool. So because we've got that thing on the master selected for this band here, we can only hear that. And then if I grab an EQ and put this headphone icon on, I can basically sweep. And then looking at the oscilloscope, I can then find where these two frequencies, these like two bands line up, and then I know that's the band I have to boost. Let me just sort of the drums. And the reverb's off. Okay, so that's what we should see. So obviously, if I'm down here, nothing comes through because I essentially have two filters on. So I just want to move this until the filters align. And I know they line because I'll see like the most volume. Interesting. So it's like I'm getting the most transient there, but not the most volume. It's around here, I think, I'm getting the most volume. Let's give it a little boost. Toughen that snare up a little bit. What I might actually do here is a bit more of a dynamic EQ, just so we're not always boosting. Just here, so it'll bounce up. Not doing the job I want. Let's try just boosting. Right, okay, let's just compare that real quick then. Again, just listening to the hats and the snares now and just seeing if they're comparable. There's probably a bit too much chunk on the snare now. I'll just turn it down a little bit. Snare in the reference track is definitely like a lot thinner. You can hear it, like not thinner, it's the transient's a lot quicker. There's less tail on it for sure. Now I could be anal and be like, let's reduce that more, but I think it's okay. It's not too bad. I think that's fine. What do you think? How are you hearing that? What's the comparable differences for you?
So I think to me, I mean, obviously, ultimately, the actual the snare samples is different and it has a different
Yeah.
sort of feel to it anyway. So I think it's probably not worth trying to go any further on that. I think that yeah, it is a completely different snare noise at the end of the day.
That is correct. However, with just like if you're just using your ears, if you were to compare these two tracks, would you say there's anything like hugely different, or would you say like, oh, these would both fit in a set together?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think they wouldn't sound out of place. Yeah.
Yeah, I
I
would
don't think
agree.
there was anything that made me think like as you're A being that there wasn't a kind of massive ooch as between them.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what we want to get to the point where like, yeah, that sounds comparable, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so there's nothing like disgusting about the other one,
yeah,
right? It's like,
exactly,
okay, yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
I
yeah.
wasn't like reaching for the volume control at that point or anything. So
Exactly. That's correct. So that's kind of where we want to get to, right? Once we've got that and we can listen back and forth and go like, yeah, that sounds comparable. Like obviously there's differences in the timbre and the size of things, but yeah, we're not trying to like copy it. We're just trying to get
yeah,
it to a point where it's comparable, right? And I feel like
absolutely,
that's
absolutely.
so the drums. So with the drums now, I feel like we've achieved that. Let's go to the low mid band as well. There probably won't be much here, but we'll just have a quick listen. Really, like you can just about hear the hats. And then you can hear the snares like got a little bit of like, yeah, I don't know, like puttiness here, I guess.
Yeah,
But here, I'd probably say the snare has a little too much. I'm just going to see if we have an EQ here. What we can actually do is if we create a new channel here real quick, and I'm just going to duplicate this out, and we're going to do this. Then I'm going to go, where's separate to new audio? And we're just going to grab the drums. Do you know about this? You can do stem splitting.
Yeah, same segment. Yeah.
Okay, good to know. So yeah, we can split this. Like, if we wanted to be even more anal, we could just like split the stem out and just really isolate the snare. I probably should have done this in a place where there's no kick drum, but yeah. And then I can just quickly just put it here, for example. Anyway, I don't want to go too anal into that, but you get the idea, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So now we're here with our drums, right? And we're sounding pretty good. So we've got a mastered stem, we've got a mastered low end. So we've got a mastered drum stem, we've got a mastered low end stem. And I think those two things are sounding pretty good together. What do you think?
I think it sounds really, really good. Surprisingly good, I have to say. Yeah. Yeah, that's incredible,
Sweet.
actually.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, man. That's good shit. All right, let's have a quick listen to it. Yeah, that snare sounds great now. It just fucking cuts right through. The ringing is still coming off the reverb. I have no idea why.
Yeah,
But,
I'm not hearing it, so that's you. But I think
yeah.
the kind of clarity overall that's been added in that, and I think just again that thing of just focusing on the things which are adding and taking away stuff that's just kind of giving that mud, it makes a huge difference to that. That's incredible.
Actually, one more thing we can do. I might as well do this now because it's a drum related thing.
Just before we move on from drums, so in the drum bus and use that second EQ, so the Schweppes one or whatever it was, finest ever EQ. What's your reasoning behind picking that as opposed to using the Fab Filter one more?
I guess three things. I mean, honestly, habit would probably be one.
Okay.
Two, ease of use, because it already has all the dials set in. Like, you just go, okay, whatever. And three, color, because it's analog emulated. It adds like a little bit of color to it, right? But one's probably the biggest reason why. Just habit. It's always been on my drum bus, and I've always used it. I saw another engineer use it like 7 years ago, and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. And I just did the same.
Just carried on. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. So you don't have to use this one. It doesn't make, you could use it in Q4, but like I said, it is easier because you basically have it already there. You don't have to like find a spot. This is more surgical. This is just more like broad strokes. So yeah, but mainly just habit. So yeah. So I've just added a return channel here called comp. This is parallel compression we're going to do. So one thing that you should always be doing is like compressing your kick and your drums together. However, because of the architecture that we're using here, with the kick being with the bass line, the drums not being with the kick, how do we actually do this and glue the kick to the drums? And so we actually have to send the kick and the drum group to a return channel and then compress them together, so we can get that, like, we can glue all the drums together. Really, it's a bit of like a workaround. So we're just going to go to this kick here, and I've got it on channel D. So I'm just going to send all the kick to D, and then I'm going to send all the drums to D as well. And then I'm going to solo this, and this is going to sound horrible because like I'm going to use a super squash signal is what we're going for, like this, right? Got like a ratio of 20:1 punch style. The attack here is going to be like just allowing some of the transient through, and the release is going to be just catching enough to then reset for the kick, essentially. But it's super squashed. I then also got a saturator here with a split band. There's nothing happening on the low band. On this band, I'm using subtle saturation. I've blasted it all the way up. And then the important thing here is I'm using this thing called dynamics. Have you got Saturn 2?
I think I do, yeah.
Yeah, if you've got the Fab Filter bundle, you'll have it. So this is a very niche thing to do. You don't like, the compressor is really like 90% of it here. This thing's a bit more niche. So what this is doing, the dynamics knob is essentially kind of like a transient shaper. So to the left, it makes it more tight. To the right, it makes it more open. And so if we listen to the high end, snappier and then more open. So we kind of want like an open sound here. This is going to make our hi-hats more like flourishy and like more open without doing too much. And then we want to blend the dry wet here. I usually just leave this like 40%. And yeah, that's essentially what we're doing. I didn't really go through that. I didn't really explain that too much, but the compressor is the most important part. So what the compressor is doing is it's just slamming the signal. This is what it looks like through the oscilloscope. Just super ugly, but like you're creating like all these really big transients. And now what we're going to do is we're going to mix those transients into the original signal, so we get like the liveliness, right? So if I'm going to solo the kick and the drums here, then turn this return channel all the way down. I'm just going to start blending it in. And it's kind of like the reverb. You want to be able to feel it, but not hear it.
Okay.
Let me turn the reverbs off as well. So I'll go too far, and you'll kind of hear like, yo, that's like obviously cooked. Kind of gets squashed, right? It sounds like really squashed and horrible. A little bit there, like maybe 14 or 15. Subtle, you can barely hear it, but without it, you can kind of be like, yeah, it just feels like a little less lively. The difference?
Yep.
Yeah, just a little bit more, a little bit more lively, and so that glues the drums together and stuff with the kick.
And I think that thing of pushing it so far so you can really hear that that's a bad thing, and then backing off from that is a really good way of doing it, actually.
Yeah,
Rather than trying to go from zero and add it in subtly, it's actually go too far and then bring it back. Yeah,
absolutely.
okay.
That applies to like everything as well, like saturation, compression. Like just go a little bit too far. Go like, okay, that's what it sounds like. Gone too far, then you bring it back, then you find the sweet spot. Yeah, cool. So our drums sound pretty fucking good, right? At this point, then you might start mixing to taste a little bit. For example, I think this like the weird hat thing. This one, I think that's a little too loud, so I'm just going to bring that down. Want it more in the background. So now everything's balanced and like mastered and like stuck in place. You can now start like taste mixing essentially, and just being like, okay, I like this being here, I like that being there and stuff. But you know everything's still like glued and anchored, so it's just all going to sound great.